Good evening. My name is Juan Zavala. I'm Vice President for University Advancement at Lamar University, and I want to thank you to our weekly digital gathering. During this time of social distancing, we wanted to keep our alumni, donors, and friends of Lamar University community connected with our institution, and what a better way to do it than every Tuesday night hearing from one of our distinguished alumni talking about their fields of interest. You've tuned into a great night. You have a unique opportunity tonight to hear from Dr. Stephen Grace. Stephen is the founder of H.S. Grace & Company, and through that company, they provide financial and operational advisory services to healthy and troubled companies. They assist in complex commercial litigation. They advise on issues of corporate governance and of oversight and control. They've been consulting or testifying experts in more than 150 civil and criminal business litigations. Stephen has more than 40 years of experience in senior management, consulting, and academic endeavors. He has authored and co-authored a substantial number of economic and financial publications. He served as the national chairman of the Financial Executives International, who awarded him their Distinguished Service Award. He's a member of Forbes CFO Forum Advisory Board, and at Lamar University, important here, he's a distinguished alumnus. He is on the board of advisors of both the College of Engineering and the College of Business. He's a member of the President's Circle. He served as a host for the Dinner and Conversation program. He served as the chair of his 1964 50th Reunion Committee, and he's also been a commencement speaker. Stephen holds his Bachelor of Science degree in Industrial Engineering from Lamar University. He earned his MBA from the University of Chicago and his PhD in Economics from the University of Houston. Stephen, thank you for being here tonight.
Juan, it's a pleasure. That's for sure. You know how I feel about the school. That's where my foundation was put together, and I have a lot to be thankful for.
Well, we're glad to have you here tonight. We're going to talk a lot, hopefully, on the ethics of management and government, responsibility, accountability, and service. And Steve, there's just nobody better to talk about this topic with us this evening than you are. So if you don't mind, we're just going to listen to your presentation. We have members of our audience who are going to be asking questions along the way. And so I will then interject during the process and ask you the questions that our audience is asking. So Dr. Grace, take it away.
Thanks, Juan. Again, it's a pleasure to be here. There's several things we want to touch upon. As one of my cohort, Larry Norwood, who I have great respect for, we co-chairing the Engineering Advisory Council right now, said that to me this morning when he heard the topic, he said, "You can talk about all that in an hour." And he was very correct there in terms, we got a lot to cover. But I want to talk about a couple of things. I want to talk about and share our views on the personal governance systems of today's professionals. This is what all the people on this call are moving into management positions. They're coming out of school, being groomed for those. They're moving into them. They may be into them. They may be into senior management positions. Some may even be on boards. There's a lot happening in the governance area, as many of us are well aware of, in our 150 matters that we've been brought into. Almost all deal with issues of business conduct. And so a couple of the things that we want to talk about tonight, and on top of that, I want to make the point that is an interesting point we often don't think about, and yet coming out of school, it's one we could bring with us, and that is that economic well-being is different than financial well-being. And that the economics has always taught that what people do is attempt to maximize their economic well-being and not simply their financial well-being, which would be centered around our financial holdings. All right, so we're gonna touch on that. We'll come back and forth to that again and again, but I'm going to start with the concept that the requirement that effective managers of today's professional workforces possess and demonstrate a sense of responsibility, a willingness to be accountable, and an attitude of service, just as set out there in slide 2, which we're looking at. And to understand this requirement, we're going to see that part of what's enforcing that is not only appropriateness of that for the management group, but also that today's professional workforce requires that of management. So if we go to look at the operating platform for today's professional, we'll call it professional workforce. This is not a platform that came together in the last 10 years or so. It has been around for hundreds of years, and that is an important point to keep in mind that we want to see. This is well-grounded. It's not something formed at the turn of the century and it's going to be gone 20 years from now. Not at all. And if we again, along with that is this cognizance or understanding that economic well-being and financial well-being are two different items. Also, what we're going to see is that today's workforce believes that you can both do well, and that's financially well, and you can do good at the same time. And they make those statements, they take those positions, they make those demands that they want to be with a company that is more than just about making money in a simplistic sense, but it's doing good. It gives them the opportunity to make things happen, and we'll see how that actually works its way through all levels of the corporation there. All right, to jump back, but to go back and to understand our foundation, the foundation that applies to the workforce as well as management, let's go to slide number 4. We've got slide, and look at what Aristotle said a couple of thousand years ago when he talked about there's the greatest pleasure in doing a kindness or service to friends or guests or companions, which can only be rendered when a man has private property. Now, he's in sort of a disagreement with Socrates and Aristotle, and Plato about who should own everything, the state of the person. But the point he's making is that he recognized that man's greatest pleasure is doing a kindness or a service to friends, guests, or companions. He's saying this is man's greatest pleasure, not accumulating financial possessions for oneself. If you drop back from Aristotle, if you go back 600 to 1,000 years there, and you go to the east, to the Tao Te Ching, the wording there, which is in slide 5, which is on the screen, look at those words and the power of those words. The master has no possessions. The more he does for others, the happier he is. The more he gives to others, the wealthier he is. Something that sort of contradicts the idea of my satisfaction is going to be maximized by accumulating financial possessions there. All right, not to overlook the Old Testament, which is, has a hand in Christian, Jewish, and Islamic faiths. You look at Isaiah and what he says, just the first verse there: share your bread with the hungry, shelter the oppressed and the homeless, clothe the naked when you see them, not turn your back on your own. Again, here's the same concept about reaching out, about being of service, about giving rather than receiving. So what we're seeing as we look at these, and then we come forward onto slide 7, and we look at Immanuel Kant, the powerful philosopher from a couple of hundred years ago. And what does he say? 2 things that fill the mind with ever new and interesting admiration and awe: the starry heavens above and the moral law within. I see them before me and connect them directly with the consciousness of my existence. So here's Kant, the powerful philosopher, brilliant thinker, setting out for us that there is a moral law within each of us there. So, and again, all right, and we come forward, let's take a look quickly at Carl Jung on the next slide 8 there, what Jung has to say. And this is his famous, often quoted statement, excuse me, among all patients in the second half of life, that is to say over 35, that was when life only ran 70 years, right? For some of us that have gone past that, among the 30 of us that work together in our firm, anyhow, so life has expanded from Jung's horizon there. But he says, that is to say, over 35, it's safe to say that every one of them fell ill because he had lost that which the living religions of every age have given to their followers, and none of them has really been healed who did not regain his religious outlook. But Jung goes on to say, this, of course, has nothing to do whatever with a particular creed or membership in a church. What he's saying is there's this consciousness of the moral law. And when we get away from that, we run into major problems there. Now, all right, so here we have all these writings, these powerful writings. And if we look again, much of what has been said is characterized in Mother Teresa's simple path. And you particularly look at the fruit of silence is prayer, fruit of prayer is faith, fruit of faith is love. But the last two, the fruit of love is service, service is peace. Most of us in our lives are searching for peace. And if we don't have that quality in there, our life is going to be a little more than a little bit short, as we know. Now,
so let me ask you, can I interrupt you?
I was just going to point something to you.
We have a question from one of our audience members. Shannon wants to know if these are statements people have made in the past. How do what those individuals said relate to us today? I mean, do you have data that shows how this is working for us in today's world?
And an excellent question. Is there anything today that tends to substantiate this? All right. Now, this is where there was a tremendous book written by an economic historian, Robert Fogel, about 20 years ago, just about the turn of the century. He's a Nobel Prize winner, a person who really studied the data, did a superb job. And this is what the title of the book is called: The Fourth Great Awakening, The Future of Egalitarianism in America. And it discusses, what he focuses on is these long-term trends. And what he points out is that over the last 100 years, where he had studied the data, people had made the decision to reduce earned work. That's where they earn wages from which or with which they can acquire material possessions. Instead, what they've elected to do is increase vol work, personal time, non-material, spiritual goods. He says, I'm not moralizing. And I happen to know Fogel. I had a chance to know him, and a brilliant guy and a humorous guy. He said, I'm not moralizing. He tells a funny story about his background with religions, or let's say maybe absence of it, but that he's looking at the data. And here people have chosen to do that. Now, one reason that that's happened, as we would all know, is that today the workforce has more choices. Back when we were all growing up in small, medium-sized towns, it might be 2 or 3 employers, that we wanted to work. We worked for one of them. We went to work at 8 o'clock. We got out at 5 o'clock, that type of thing. There was not the flexibility. Now, with the qualifications that the workforce has, their ability to move, the mobility in society is different. And we're watching people make choices, and they're making them all the time with regard to how they're going to spend the time. And so what he does is that on slide 10 there, we got, okay, let's see here. Let's go to slide 11 would be fine, thanks. That what he is saying, and this goes right back to the point we were making earlier, that individuals seek to maximize their utility and satisfaction, not their financial wealth. If you wanted to maximize your financial wealth, what would we be doing? We'd all be working more, to get paid more and have more to spend. All right, so here again is Fogel confirming, as economics does, that economic well-being is not equivalent at all to financial well-being, and that individuals in our country have consciously and deliberately made the decision to reduce the earned work and the material possessions they might otherwise acquire, and instead have directed their time to family, community, religious, other related activities. Now, on slide 12, he sets out an example. And he sets out an example of 2 individuals. They both are tool makers. They both work for the same company. They both make $20 an hour, and they both are age 45, okay? Now, what we notice, first of all, is that John, his total annual income is $36,000. Harry's is $64,000. Okay, what's the difference here? Well, we look at the work year, the hours worked in the work year, and John worked 1,800 hours. Harry worked 3,200 hours. So one's working about 150 hours a month. One's working about 260 hours a month. All right, but where did that come from? Each of them are making their own free choices. And keep in mind, they worked for a company that would accommodate those different choices. And that's what's important today, is to recognize that's the environment that we're in. All right, but look at this now. Here's where the differences start to show up. John knows, because the way he works, he's going to work to 65 before he retires. On the other hand, Harry is saying at 55, I plan to retire. But how is John spending his time now? His work preferences for a short work week, long weekends, month-long vacation in the summer, what do those allow him to do? They allow him additional time with the family. They allow activity in his religion, coaches his son's little league team. On the other hand, there's nothing wrong with those choices, nor the ones that Harry makes, to work along, long work week, overtime, minimal vacation. But he is looking at right now, he's not doing very much vol work, but he looks to do more after he's retired. Anybody making a mistake here? No, these are two individuals that are making their choices to optimize their economic well-being, and they're doing it differently, and that's not a surprise. Now,
and let me ask you something here, Stephen, if you don't mind. Seems like a good point to ask a question that one of our viewers has posed. Jeff wants to know if you think that today's professionals are demanding more accountability and maybe even more accessibility, more options from their corporations than they were in the past.
Exactly. I think that's exactly what's happening, and that's what management has to be aware of. Again, you go back 120 years, and we owned the factory. It'd show up at 8 and go home at 5. There was no discussion because there were no options for the work. Today, it's different. You're right. They are looking for that, and that's what they're expecting. And management's going to have to be sensitive. Doesn't mean that that the workforce gets to run free wherever. Not at all. But you've got this added requirement to deal with these preferences that these individuals have, and that's what we have to build in. That they are there maximizing their economic well-being as they see it at that point in time, and it may change over time. But we're in the world where that workforce has flexibility. That's good, but then management's got to stay up with that, still manage the business, still hit its objectives, but at the same time, fit the needs of, let these people maximize. That's what we're talking about. Yeah. Very good question there. Now, let me cross over to a real life example here that just shows how much this vol time work can mean to very senior executives. This is what happened, and I happen to be part of it, so I do it quite well. New York City chapter of what's a group called the Financial Executives Institute. This is 10,000 members across the country, very senior individual. You have to be a part of senior financial management. Your company has to be over a certain size to actually qualify. These people, as we would know, serious jobs, big responsibilities. Yes, they get paid. But they could literally, as we sort of laughingly say, they could work 30 hours a day, 8 days a week with the range of responsibilities they could have. All right. Now, what happens when the New York City chapter back in the early 1990s is looking at New York, and New York had a bundle of problems just as a place to live and work, a lot of issues. And it began to ask the question, can we use our experiences to help make New York a better place to live and work? And what happened was not to tell people what to do. We weren't taking over anything, making decisions, but simply assisting. If we had experience that we could share with the individuals that could help them in doing what they were determined to go ahead and do, would this work? And as you can see from the slide, we work, and that's only some of the groups that we performed work with. We did 7 or 8 jobs with the state controller. They came to us and they asked us, they said, look, we're getting ready to spend millions and millions of dollars putting in a new payroll and human resource system. Can you guys and girls share experience with us as to what how your systems have worked and not worked? We're not consultants. We're not trying to replace consultants. We're not selling anything. We're just sharing experiences on what happened. We had one company come in who had a combined human resource and payroll system, another one that had separate, another one that sort of had a hybrid. So after 7 hours of discussion that these people from the state had, where they were going to be spending, again, millions and millions of dollars, they could walk out of there a lot more educated about what they were getting into and things to think about. Again, all right, with the type of, and you go on through with all these different groups. But what really happened that surprised us that we're in the leadership of the chapter was the response of the chapter members, that how they responded to this. Because here are people who, like I say, work-wise are loaded up. They could really just want to spend their free time on their own. But what happened there with those individuals was the following. These are the statements that they made when they began to drop notes to the chapter leadership about these things. They said, for example, one comment, I participated in chapter board meetings for years at which we discussed membership and programs. Now we're addressing important topics. Second one, we cannot just have monthly meetings in which we eat and talk. We must do something worthwhile. Number 3, I've been a member for over 10 years. This is the most important thing the chapter has ever done. The last one, we must do this work. Now that's kind of remarkable. The people, very experienced individuals who could be looking for a little free time to themselves and said, no, this is where I want to lead my life. So, in other words, what we're seeing here is the extent to which this vol work, what it meant for people, what it meant to them, and what the response to these FEI members is really, when you look at it, it's completely consistent with Fogel's research. He's saying he says, this is where people are. This is what they're looking for a mix. And if you are a company, as the question was asked, one of the questions, Juan, you asked, does a company need to try to accommodate this? And I say try in a managed way, in a proper way. Yeah. And when you do, the returns can be great because people love it. I was in meetings at times with teams that were working on projects. We might be meeting 6:30 in the evening. And I was looking at everybody, you could see how they really valued being there. No one was trying to say, I had the answer or this or that, trying to figure out how we could help address whatever the issue was. And I'll mention one other story that was very interesting. The state controller's office came to us and they said, we have a problem we think you all may be able to help us with. And it is of concern to both the Firemen's Union and the Fire Chiefs Organization. These two groups are not friends. They are at it all the time over issues, but they both felt they had an issue. And we all sat down together over in the Equitable's offices. And so here we are, and these two groups, again, had a lot of animosity toward each other, but they said, here's our problem. They said, we have a great compensation program if any of our people get hurt. It's going to take care of them really, and if they can't come back, they can take care of them the rest of their life. But they said it's not working. And this is a little bit on the humorous side, but they said once the injured person gets to know the names of the individuals on the daily soap operas, you're not going to get them back to work. You're not going to get them back to work. You've lost them. And yet their life is miserable. Divorce, depression, they are not finding happiness. They said, we gave them this great program to protect them, but it's not working. What can we do? And we put our heads together and a lot of, our companies running big plants, you're trying to prevent injuries, you're trying to help people recover from those injuries and shared. But that was a great example of two parties, two groups that were not in love with each other, but realized they had a common problem. And so you realize how you feel when you're able to be helpful of that in that type of situation there. So one other thing that I'll just touch upon, when you look at Fogel's work here, that it's interesting, and you look at these writings that have cited going back thousands of years and so forth, that interestingly, that there is actually a conversion or a fusion between economists and the spiritualists and the philosophers, isn't there? Because the economists are saying, and have always said in the 400 or 500 years of economics existence, that people are trying to maximize their well-being. They're trying to maximize their utility. And the philosophers and the spiritualists for 5,000 years have been saying, hey, by the way, if you want to maximize the quality of your life, you might think about the following things, which they've set out and we reviewed a number. So interestingly, they're not really on a different page, although some people would say, hey, wait a minute, these things are, these people, they don't even talk to each other. And yet they're coming at it with very common objectives. As the slide shows, the economists say people maximize. And Adam Smith, who was the father of economics, was actually a professor of moral philosophy, so it would not be surprising that he had thought about these kinds of issues. But the spiritualists and the philosophers are saying, recognize the moral law within, recognize and respect the rights of others, lead a life of service, and you may come out pretty well. Now, this is again, all ties in. Obviously it ties into our personal lives, but it ties into the management, the attitude of management. As you get together and you're leading, you're guiding, you're managing people, these are and the people today, as we were talking earlier, pick up on this. They're sensitive to it, and that's what they're looking for. That's what they're looking for from management. Now, the second thing that comes from Fogel's work, and I'll touch upon it again quickly, but it's really powerful. He said, look, because it calls his book The Fourth Great Awakening. And let's flip to the next slide, 17. But he talks about, look, what happened in the Third Great Awakening that was a mistake was we thought the way you make people equal is to give them equal material possessions. That's how you make people equal. Divide it all up, give everybody equal thing, they're all going to be. Well, just from what we've been talking about this evening, we realize that is not correct, because different people have very different interests in different directions. Look at John and Harry, the two toolmakers, all right? To force both of them to work 40-hour weeks would be a mistake. And you look at what Fogel said, if you want to create egalitarianism in America, these are the things that you have to embed in people. And it is a tremendous list. Actually, there's a sense of purpose, vision of opportunity, right on through appreciation for quality, self-esteem, these things. You want to make people equal. You want them to be able to step up and live fully in this world. Embed those values in them, help them understand the important things, and help teach that type of thing. And we've got something that is very, very powerful there. All right, now let us move on. We're covering a lot of ground here. When we get into the issues, the specific issues of management, responsibility, accountability, and service here, we've got the situation that, as Juan had mentioned earlier, about today's workforce can look management right in the eye, and they call for management to have a comprehensive understanding of and willingness to address their responsibilities. We got management. We want to respect them. If we don't want to respect them, it's highly likely many people will move on to where they can go, where they respect the management, respect the organization. They want management to be accountable, and that calls for checks and balances, which I'll talk about in a moment. And they want the management to bring an attitude of service and not privilege and entitlement. That's a long time ago. There's still people who play that game, and that's a game that has a very short string to it. the way to build to build an organization is to have this understanding responsibilities, being accountable and addressing them, bringing an attitude of service. If that's your leaders, you're on a powerful road. Now, what we've got is that if from what we're saying today, I think we can see that if management does not have an understanding of these factors that are moving around out there that we've been touching upon rather rapidly, but if you don't, you could make the mistake of thinking you can control your workforce simply by compensation. And what we're talking about tonight, you can see that's far from that. Compensation is certainly part of the game, but it's only part of it. And it's that overall mix of the sensitivity to the, trying to create flexibility for that workforce in many different ways. But at the same time, you've got to run an organization. That's okay. But that's not as simple as saying show up at 8 and you go home at 5. It's a much more of a challenge there. And again, management's got to step up and put in place the proper controls, starting with itself. Because when we say management needs to be accountable, what I can share with you is in the 150 matters that we've been brought into, and the 30 of us that have known each other, all have known each other for many, many years, guys and gals, we're dealing with business conduct all the time. Our issue is always who did what, where, when, who got it more correct or less correct, or what went wrong on all fronts. These types of things that we're looking at. So we're living in this area of business conduct, and of course we lived in it in the course of many years in our own experiences. One of the things that we believe is absolutely critical, and this starts right from the board level through senior management right on down, is that if you're going to have an organization that's accountable, number one, the accountability's got to start right from the top. Boards have to step up to their responsibilities, senior management with theirs. And one of the ways you do that is use checks and balances. There's a concept that floats around. You may have run into it called tone at the top. We're going to get the tone at the top right. Well, that is a badly flawed concept. Not that you may not be able to make it work, but the tone at the top said, look, we've got a good person in here and he or she should run the business. We're going to turn it over to them and let them go. That does not work. Most of the problems that we have seen just throughout everywhere almost all start at the top. Don't fool ourselves, and it starts right at the top. And in many cases, the board had not positioned themselves properly to be on top of the situation and to say, wait a minute, these things are out of bounds. And I will just cite one case for you that's gotten a lot of play in the paper over the last couple of years, and that's the Wells Fargo Bank. That you had a problem out there that got radically out of control with the very senior executives, and the board did not take the actions it should have. Subsequently, every board member, and that was a board of people who had a very fine track record of work, and yet every one of them got a letter from the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve that said you didn't do your job. And literally all of them are gone, were removed. And that's not the way you want to end your career. And there are plenty of other situations that I could cite, and we do cite in our various situations. But what you got to have in any organization is you have to have checks and balances. You can't let me get off in a corner and manipulate and intimidate people to do what I want to do. I have to have a framework within which I work that other people are there and are able to say, hey, wait a minute, what's going on, where we got the checks and balances that help keep people on the straight and narrow. All right, now and where does this come from again? Just as the slide shows. What did Lord Acton say? He said, power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely. I mean, do we need to keep learning the same lessons? We thought we're going to put one person in charge, they're going to take it, and we don't have to worry anymore. Well, it doesn't work that way. And again, we're seeing more and more, just in simple terms, more and more companies are going to a separate chairman of the board and CEO. Some cases it would make no difference because the person's going to handle things properly. But if things can get out of line, having a separate chair and a separate CEO is one big step that can be taken that puts the board in an improved position to control things, to keep things in balance there. Again, the other quote from the Roman poet, Latin poet Ovid 2,000 years ago, "The better things of life I see and approve, the worse things of life I follow." Kind of humorous, but it's true. Here I should be going over here and I end up way over there. With checks and balances, that type of thing can be helpfully be prevented. All right. So when you look at monarchs and dictatorships, it's the same thing, because the concept is these things are very straightforward types of organization. Isn't this the most efficient way to guide governments? The only trouble is history has shown that they don't work because you don't get the tone at the top right, and there are no checks and balances in there. So what do we have that has evolved from all that? When you go and look at it, it's democracy. Democracy's onerous. It's time consuming. Every day you read the paper, what are you reading about? Democrats and Republicans are fighting over whatever. All right, but in the arrangement of that, you've got a balance of power. And what you want is not people running off the reservation by having total control. And we've got this back and forth. And that's why democracy is what it is today. Is it perfect? Of course not. We know that. But it's the best thing we've found there. Now, again, coming to the last point about service. Again, we look back on the great leaders in this country, great leaders of all times. They always had service on their mind, an attitude of service. They're there to serve. That's starting with their own workforce, their own customers, all these things. It's not entitlement and privilege they're working from. And you look at George Washington's service to the country. You look at Lincoln and his Gettysburg Address talking about what the country was all about. If we go to the next slide there, you look at Martin Luther King. Or John Kennedy, when he said, "Ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country." That's all about service. Real simple and straightforward. Now, let me conclude, and again, I've covered a lot, but let me conclude with a couple of thoughts that are on the final slide. And this is something that may be a little bit of a surprise, but I don't think management is a zero-sum game. Von Neumann and Morgenstern and all these things notwithstanding, in other words, my point is this: if you've got a management in there that is really working from the standpoint of understanding responsibilities, being accountable, and bringing an attitude of service, you have situations where either everybody wins or everybody loses. And you've got the right type of management team, everybody's going to win. It's not one group winning while the other loses. You don't have management taking it away from the workers. You have a jointly determined situation, just like between the Firemen's Union and the Fire Chiefs Association. Find out something that works. The firemen ultimately were being hurt because this great program was not working. And as a last point, I would say to everyone, don't be afraid to be morally correct. At the end of the day, you must live with yourself and the moral law within you. Doesn't mean you should go around setting the standards for other people, but that you know those yourself. And you want to pay attention to them. Anyhow, I think that we've probably covered enough, Juan, in terms of.
We've had a couple of questions come in, Stephen, and I didn't want to fit them in any other point, but let me ask you this. One of our viewers, Drew, wants to know what advice you have that would help businesses to reduce turnover.
Well, and that's a great question. If a firm has too much turnover, I think it has to step back in its best interest and try to figure out where the causes are. If it's simply that they can't pay a wage that other people can pay, that's just a tough problem. It doesn't have enough profitability. But if you create an environment that gives people the non-monetary benefits as well as monetary, or the non-monetary things that you can do for them that help them and will help tie them to the firm. Each one of these situations, when we're talking about turnover, is so situation specific. You really got, just like each of the cases we get into, there's not some simple formula you bring in. You really got to look at the situation and seek to understand what is there. So that's just digging in, but looking at what management's doing, look at the workers are doing, look where the firm's going, and try to figure that baby out. It's a real challenge.
And then since we're talking about Lamar University and this is who we are, a really relevant question from Shannon. She asks, what advice you have for students who are seeking to prepare themselves to be in leadership positions?
Yeah, I think that's what we want them to do, and that's what we think. If they will understand the importance of work, understand your responsibilities, be willing to be accountable, hold yourself accountable. Don't just hold the people that work for you accountable. Demonstrate it, that you've got standards, you've got things to be done, and then bring an attitude of service. You're there to help the company. That person's a winner, and wherever they go to work, they're going to do fine, because that's the kind of person people want to follow. And that person will move in an organization because they're there with the proper balance to do what's right for everyone at that point in time.
Thank you. And then we have another question from another viewer tonight. Tim wants to know what practical advice you would give management teams who want to create a significant cultural shift in their organization.
Well, the first thing is going to be understand the need for the cultural shift. What is it we're trying to do? What does it seem that we're not doing correct that needs to be changed? And look at the options we have for making that change. Again, getting to the specifics of the particular company. But all right, we're going to make a cultural change. What does that mean? And does it mean the same thing to the people who are going to be sort of on the receiving end of this restructuring? Not only us that may be leading the company, but how are they going to take it? How are they going to accept it? So it's some hard work of sitting down, but it can be done, needs to be done. Firms need to continue to look at that, but you've got to dig into that situation, and you've got to. I think that's a perfect example where one person trying to do that by themselves would be very dangerous. Not that they would not mean to do things well, but that that's where you need a cross section of thinking, and maybe from representatives from the various groups within a company would be, in one form or another, would be useful to draw on as you were putting together a cultural change.
Thank you. Well, and what I want to say at this point, Stephen, a couple of things. The first is that we have people who will view this presentation after the fact, not live, not being able to ask Stephen Grace these questions. So we're going to encourage viewers to add their questions or to send those questions to us. And we have ways of communicating with Stephen, and we'll get with him and get an answer to you. Stephen, I personally wanted to thank you for taking the time. What I know, and some of us know that the rest of our viewers don't know, is the extraordinary amount of time that you have spent in the last few weeks and the 5 or 6 hours just today on helping our College of Engineering to plan for the future of our college and how to move forward in such an interesting and complicated time in our history. So I want to thank you for taking even more time to help out your alma mater yet again.
Well, that's a pleasure. I mean, I think starting right with our president, Dr. Evans, terrific individual, our new dean, Dean Craig, great person to work with, and Larry Norwood, who I mentioned earlier, who co-chairs the council with me, terrific individual there. We were talking the other day, and Larry wasn't just he had 7,000 people around the world that reported to him in his organization. You have to understand a little bit about how things work. So and the whole council is a great group of individuals. We got a great school. A lot to be proud of and a lot to carry out to to the general marketplace to help them understand what we do.
Indeed. Well, again, thank you, Stephen. I've said this to you too many times to catch up, but we owe you. Thank you so much for taking the time and for being with us tonight. And we appreciate everybody who joined us this evening and encourage people to ask questions. And so, speaking of Ken Evans, our president, coincidentally, today happens to be his birthday. So we're going to end the program this evening with a special presentation made possible for us by Eric Shannon. Eric is Director of Athletic Bands for Lamar. And to close our program tonight, please enjoy this video presentation. Thank you.
Hey, President Evans, good morning and happy birthday. Over the last couple of years, we've made an awesome tradition of coming and meeting you at your driveway and having a pep rally. Well, because of the pandemic, we can't do that in person, so we thought we would do it virtually and we would put together for you a birthday fight song to get your day started off right. All right, Lakota, hit it.
Let's go, Big Red!
Let's go, LU!
Happy birthday, President Evans.
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 Happy birthday, President Evans. Happy birthday, President Evans.
Happy birthday,
Happy birthday, President Evans.
LU.
Happy birthday, President Evans. I hope it's a great one.
Boom, ba-dum, bum, bum.